So I'm Deborah Stipek. I'm the Dean of the Graduate School of Education at Stanford, and I'm absolutely delighted to see you all here this evening at the 2015 Cubberley Lecture. This is our signature program that's really designed to bring the community together with those of us who live in the university to explore and deepen our understanding of some of the important educational issues of our time. And what more important issue is there than teaching? I think the topic for tonight is particularly timely because it is Teacher Appreciation Week. Although I do want to say that in the Graduate School of Education, every week is Teacher Appreciation Week. So speaking of teachers and appreciating teachers, I'm delighted to introduce first to you our very own Linda Darling-Hammond. I was given explicit direction to introduce her, even though we all know she needs no introduction. I really was tempted to just say, "Here's Linda," but I was told that that would be totally inappropriate. And there may be a few things that you don't know about her that I would like to share. So Linda is the Charles E. Ducommun Professor of Education in the GSE, where she founded the Stanford Center for Opportunity Policy in Education, much more easily thought of as SCOPE, which conducts research and policy analysis on issues affecting educational equity and opportunity, including curriculum assessment and teacher policy and practices. From 1994 to 2001, Linda was executive director of the National Commission on Teaching and America's Future, which the 1996 report, What Matters Most, Teaching for America's Future, led to sweeping policy changes affecting teaching and schooling, and was named one of the most influential reports affecting U.S. education. In 2006, Linda was named one of the nation's 10 most influential people affecting educational policy over the past decade. And in 2008, she served as the leader of President Barack Obama's education policy transition team. She continues to shape California's education policy as the chair of the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. So please join me in welcoming Linda here tonight. But don't come up yet, Linda. Just tell her. For the moment, we just want her to know how happy we are that she's here. Second, I want to give a warm welcome to Dana Goldstein. Dana is a journalist and the author of the New York Times bestseller and notable book of 2014, The Teacher Wars, A History of America's Most Embattled Profession. She's a staff writer at the Marshall Project and a contributor to Slate, The Atlantic, and other magazines. Dana writes about education, social science, inequality, criminal justice, women's issues, cities, and public health. I actually didn't know that she wrote about all of these issues, and I was really impressed that she could have such breadth and yet such a deep understanding of the topic that we're going to be talking about tonight, about teachers. She has been a Spencer Foundation Fellow in Education Journalism, a Schwartz Fellow, no relation to Dan Schwartz as far as I know, at the New America Foundation, and a Puffin Foundation Fellow at the Nation Institute. She graduated from Brown University and attended 13 years of public schooling in Ossining, New York. So, given that we're talking about teachers and that it is Teacher Appreciation Week, we thought we'd just mention something about our guest teachers. Dana's favorite teacher was Mr. Tunney. And the reason he was her favorite teacher is that he taught her how to read great literature critically. From Toni Morrison to Ernest Hemingway to Robert Penn Warren. That's quite a broad spectrum. And it looks to me like this is a teacher who was anticipating the Common Core, because I have a feeling Dana would have done very well on it. Dana was kind enough to meet with Stanford's Pre-Education Society this afternoon. This is a group of students, undergraduates, who are seeking to attract the best and brightest Stanford undergraduates to the teaching profession. So we'd like to thank you, Dana, for taking the time to do that. So, and let's hear some applause for Dana. I can see we didn't all get the script that I got, so So thirdly, I'd like to introduce Elizabeth Green, co-founder, CEO, and editor-in-chief of Chalkbeat. Otherwise, she doesn't have very much to do with it. This is a nonprofit news organization that covers educational change efforts across the country. Elizabeth was an Abe Journalism Fellow studying education in Japan and a Spencer Fellow in Education Journalism at Columbia University. She's the author of the recent New York Times bestseller, Building a Better Teacher, How Teaching Works and How to Teach It to Everyone, which features the work, would just like to point out, of Stanford's own Nate Gage, Pam Grossman, Lee Schulman, who I think is here today, Peter Williamson, Rick Henushek, and probably others. So what about Elizabeth's teacher? Her most inspiring teacher was John Mathwin, whose teaching was the kind that seems invisible at first glance, but only achieves that invisibility through intense craftsmanship, which is what we know good teachers are. You may also not have known that Dana and Elizabeth are good friends, and we're delighted to welcome them so we can learn from them and also to give them an opportunity to hang out with each other. I just want to say one thing about these books, which are in the lobby for you to purchase if you're, and I have a feeling that there will be a run on them after you hear them speak. I have a confession to make, which was I thought it was really important that I sort of be familiar with this work, given that we're kind of hosting this whole thing. And so I sat down thinking that I was going to spend about an hour with each book. I read the whole books. I had no intention of doing that. Seriously, I don't have time to read a whole book. But they're just incredibly engaging and insightful and thoughtful and taught me a lot. So I'm here to recommend them, and I want you to know I don't get any percentage whatsoever. So just to get this show on the road, here's what we're going to do this evening. Linda's going to help us frame the conversation, and then Dana and Elizabeth will each have some remarks, and then they're going to have a conversation with each other, led by Linda, and then there will be opportunities for you to ask questions of all three of our panelists. If you would like to follow the discussion on Twitter, check out hashtag Kublex, C-U-B-B-L-E-X. So the next thing I have to say is, here's Linda.
Well, I am delighted to welcome these two brilliant young analysts of teaching here to Stanford. Their two books have illuminated some vexing dilemmas about teaching's social historical position in the United States, which is the primary theme of Dana's book, but also is picked up somewhat by Liz, and about the problem of pedagogical learning and development, which is Liz's major theme, but it appears a little bit in Dana's book as well. These are intimately linked because the status of teaching depends on the knowledge base and its acquisition by teachers. There's an inverse relationship between our ability to produce well-informed, thoughtful, effective teachers and our intention as a society to micromanage their work. The more we can trust the people in the schools, the more we're willing to give them the collective professional autonomy to make judgments about the work, and we'll get into that autonomy question a little more. And the more we distrust the capacity of people in schools, the more we're pressed towards scripted curriculum and micromanaging that work. And in fact, we've been this way before, and that's a major theme in Dana's historical work. Back in the early 1900s, the creation of truly professional educators was subversive business. Places like Teachers College that had been founded to provide master's degrees for training the teachers of the urban poor were suspect to the scientific managers who wanted to hire low-paid, relatively uneducated women for teaching. Their goal was to make schools efficient with more tightly prescribed curriculum, more teacher-proof texts, more extensive testing, more rules and regulations. They consciously sought to hire less well-educated teachers who would work for lower wages and who would go along with the regime of prescribed lessons and pacing schedules without protest. In a book widely used for teacher training at that time, the need for unquestioned obedience was stressed as the first rule of efficient service for teachers. And recently in California, we have just gone through that era again, where places like Stanford's teacher education program were subversive in the face of the scripted curriculum era that we have just recently emerged from. One speaker at an NEA meeting in 1914 observed that there were so many efficiency engineers running handcars through the schoolhouses in most large cities that the grade school teachers could hardly turn around in their rooms without butting into 2 or 3 of them. And they were doing time and motion studies and all kinds of things. During that decade, precisely 100 years ago, nationally distributed tests of arithmetic, handwriting, and English were put into use. The results were used to compare students, teachers, and schools, to report to the public, and to award merit pay, a short-lived innovation due to the many problems it caused. Does any of this sound familiar? In the view of these brilliant managerial engineers, professionally trained teachers were considered troublesome because they had their own ideas about education and frequently did not go along meekly with the plan. One teacher wrote in the American Teacher in 1912, "We have yielded to the arrogance of big businessmen and have accepted their criteria of efficiency at their own valuation without question. We have consented to measure the results of educational efforts in terms of price and product, the terms that prevail in the factory and the department store, but education, since it deals in the first place with human organisms and in the second place with individualities, is not analogous to a standardizable manufacturing product. Education must measure its efficiency not in terms of so many promotions per dollar of expenditure, nor even in terms of so many student hours per dollar of salary. It must measure its efficiency in terms of increased humanism, increased power to do, increased capacity to appreciate." We are still having this debate, or as Dana might put it, we are having a war that continues on, and that is really partly because of the struggle between a factory model conception of teaching as the work of bureaucrats and a professional conception of teaching as the work of people who are well informed about learning and development and about how to effectively use strategies to support young people in actualizing their potential. So I just want to suggest that as we think about learning from these books and the analyses, the very insightful analyses they provide us, we also look abroad at countries that have thought about teaching as a profession. And a lot of my own recent work in the past years has been international, going to places like Singapore and Finland and Canada and other places where teaching is treated much differently, where they have in fact built systems that enable all teachers to be well prepared and to have the status that we say we crave in the United States, but typically do not organize ourselves to provide. If you were to become a teacher in Finland or Singapore or Ontario, Canada, or many other places, you would enter a highly regulated and well-designed teacher education program. You would attend school, typically earning a master's degree, completely at government expense, with no fees whatsoever, and usually with a salary or a stipend while you go to school. After you got out, you would be inducted by mentor teachers who are trained for that purpose, often themselves prepared and on a sort of a career ladder that ensures that they have the time as well as the opportunity and training to support you in your work. You would have an opportunity to continue to learn, usually in the vicinity of something like 10 to 15 hours a week of time to collaborate with lesson planning with other teachers, action research to improve the quality of instruction, going into each other's classrooms to observe, and a variety of other strategies to engage in the development of curriculum and much more open-ended teacher-designed and teacher-scored assessments. And you would have the opportunity to be evaluated and supported in a context that emphasizes and values teacher collaboration, which the most recent studies, the TALIS surveys of 100,000 teachers around the world found is the single most valued aspect of teaching, the opportunity to collaborate in decision-making and in teaching and learning, and the one that is the most strong predictor of teachers' efficacy and of later achievement. So a key question for us is, how do we learn from the insightful analyses of people like Liz Green and Dana Goldstein, and the opportunities that are afforded to us for learning from other countries? There's a saying that a wise person learns from his own mistakes. A wiser person learns from the mistakes of others. So I propose that we use this opportunity to become wiser. And now I'd like to introduce Dana Goldstein. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to start by saying what a deep honor and pleasure it is to be here giving the Cubberley Lecture. Thank you, Dean Stipek, for your kind introductory remarks. When I first got on the education beat as a reporter in 2006, and the whole world seemed just totally obsessed with no excuses charter schools and merit pay tied to student test scores, Linda Darling-Hammond's voice and her work and her strong commitment to equity in the system, in addition to excellence, was something I turned to again and again to learn the beat of education as a journalist. So it is just wonderful to be here with her today. And ever since Elizabeth and our books came out within a month of each other last year, and we've been searching for the perfect opportunity to speak together, and we just couldn't be more thrilled that it's here at Stanford. So I want to go back in time, because if you think that veteran teachers are subjected to controversy and unfair attacks in 2015, you might find it interesting to think about 1846. 1846 was the flowering of the common schools movement. It was the state-by-state effort led by thinkers like Horace Mann to make elementary education universal and free and taxpayer-supported for the first time in American history. Now, at the time, the vast majority of teachers were men. But reformers in the common schools movement wanted even conservatives who opposed raising taxes to support the idea of universal public education. So they had the clever idea, let's feminize the teaching profession. If we can attract women to do this job, we can pay them 50% as much as men. Now, Catherine Beecher is the sister of Harriet Beecher Stowe, the author of Uncle Tom's Cabin, and she was a leader in this movement. You know, she was an idealist. She wanted respectable, single, middle-class women to have the opportunity to do interesting work outside the home. And as a committed Christian, she also believed women were purer and more biologically and morally appropriate to be teachers of women. However, she was a pragmatist, and she looked for male allies in these efforts. And she didn't just say women would be good teachers and women were smart enough to be teachers. She actually launched a vicious attack on the male teachers of the time. She went all across the country giving lectures like this one. I call her in my book the first media darling school reformer. You might think of her as her day's Michelle Rhee. She called male teachers, quote, direct quote, incompetent, intemperate, coarse, hard, unfeeling men, too lazy and stupid to be entrusted with the care of children. Now, this combination of a moral argument and a financial argument to bring women into the profession really worked. And by the late 19th century, 90% of teachers in northern cities like New York and Chicago were women. And surprise, surprise, at that time, reformers like the efficiency reformers that Linda just referred to determined that women were actually the problem. Charles William Eliot, the president of Harvard at the time, he wrote in the Atlantic magazine, quote, "Women are physically weaker than men, more apt to be worn out by the fatiguing work of teaching. The average skill of the teachers in the public schools may be increased by raising the present low proportion of male teachers in the schools." And he was very interested in international comparisons. He said, quote, "Herein lies the great cause of the inferiority of the American teaching to the French and German teaching." Now, I think the rhetoric has actually softened somewhat today. But we are still familiar with this idea that to improve teaching, we have to kind of get rid of massive amounts of people and bring massive amounts of some new other type of person to the profession. In the late 1990s, Dave Levin, the co-founder of the KIPP Charter School, said the following: "We need an entirely new teaching workforce, entirely new. There are some great teachers out there, but they've been mixed among a bad element." And teaching is consistently the only profession that is mentioned in the State of the Union address. For example, in 2011, President Obama said that he would, quote unquote, stop making excuses for bad teachers. What I want to suggest is that when we notice our education debate has become especially hostile to teachers or consumed with bad teachers in particular, we should be skeptical. Why? It has to do with the scale of the teaching profession. There are 3.3 million public school teachers. That's 5 times as many lawyers or doctors. Each year, we hire 100,000 to 200,000 new teachers. And in low-income schools alone in recent years, we've sometimes hired as many as 70,000 new teachers. And by the way, Teach for America provides just about 10% of the new teachers just for low-income schools. Now, one of the things I was interested in doing when I was reporting my book was ask some of the folks who believe we need a whole new class of teachers, how many of our current teachers do you think are ineffective or not good at their jobs? And I heard a range of guesstimates, but I would estimate that people said between 2 and 15% of our current teacher corps is ineffective. That's 66,000 to 495,000 people. We cannot fire our way to the top. We cannot decide tomorrow to get rid of 66,000 to 495,000 teachers and make sure that the folks replacing them would be better. How do we know they would be better? So if we can't improve teaching by getting rid of teachers en masse, you might hope that we focus on building up the skills of our current teachers. But historically, as Linda mentioned, that isn't what we have chosen as a nation to do. Instead, we've been consumed with rating and ranking teachers in the hope that this would allow us to identify low performers and root them out. Indeed, there is nothing new about the demand for data-driven school reform and data-driven teacher evaluation in particular. It dates back again to the mid-19th century when Horace Mann, the nation's first state secretary of education in Massachusetts, shifted schools from the old way of testing students, which was to have students get up in front of the class and orally present what they've learned, like I'm doing here now, to written standardized tests. Because with the written tests, both students and their teachers' productivity and efficiency could be assessed with numbers more easily. Merit pay for teachers tied to point-based evaluation systems is likewise not new. It dates back, the earliest instance I could find, researching my book, was Atlanta in 1915, where it was instituted in large part to cut budgets, not out of any real true desire to improve teaching. And I'm sure most of us here today are familiar with value-added measurement. It's been portrayed by statisticians and economists since the 1990s as a very new way to evaluate teachers based on their students' test scores. In fact, it's not new. In the 1920s and 30s, statisticians developed something that they called the pupil change method. So today we call it value-added measurement. Back then it was called the pupil change method. And they did an experiment on college math instructors at Iowa State College, and that found out that the best produced 3 points of gains for their students on a 100-point test. And it was a small effect size, but it was statistically significant, very similar to what we're seeing from value-added measurement studies today. And districts got excited. They wanted to actually implement the pupil change method as a way to evaluate teachers. And this was a well-intentioned effort to hold teachers accountable for student learning. Now, William Maxwell was the superintendent of the New York City schools. And when he got the job at the turn of the 20th century, he saw that 99.5% of teachers were being rated good at the end of each year. And he thought this was ridiculous. I mean, he felt that more than half of 1% of teachers were probably had some room to improve. So looking at the pupil change method and the whole efficiency movement that was popular at the time, he created a complex new teacher evaluation system. Teachers would be given grades of A, B, C, or D from their principals, and principals would fill out these very complex spreadsheets with lots of different factors. Now, there was an initial burst of enthusiasm. Everyone thought this was a very clever idea. But in 1919, the New York Times reported that educators considered it, quote, a joke. There was so much paperwork, and the principals were so unable to actually put the time into this system that they decided basically all teachers got a B+. And it was the same thing again. Over 90% of teachers had a B+, just the kind of thing we're trying to solve for. And it's funny, because if you followed the news stories of the value-added measurement systems rolling out across the country, you know that 95% and up of teachers are doing just very well on them. Very similar to what happened in the 20s and 30s when this was tried before. So we still haven't used these bureaucratic tools in a magical way to differentiate teachers. So if mass firings and rank and yank through complex bureaucratic evaluation tools doesn't work, what could? First, we need to be driven by quality education research. For one thing, we know teacher working conditions really matter. When teachers have trusting relationships with principals and parents, when they feel they have adequate supplies in their classrooms and support on student discipline, test scores go up. And if you're interested in that, I recommend a book called Trust in Schools by Anthony Brick and Barbara Schneider. Another thing we know is that teacher career longevity also matters. 3 economists, Matthew Ronfelt, Susanna Loeb, and James Wyckoff, conducted an unprecedented 8-year study of 850,000 New York City 4th and 5th graders. In schools with high teacher turnover, students lost significant amounts of learning in both reading and math compared to socioeconomically similar peers at schools with low teacher turnover. And crucially, students at the high turnover schools lost learning even if their own teacher was not new. So think about that. Even if overall teacher quality at the school remained constant and your own individual teacher was not new, you were still impacted by the results of teacher turnover. And this is common sense, because schools are communities, and we should know this is true. Turnover means administrators are recruiting, interviewing, and hiring when they could be focused on instruction. When many teachers resign each year, institutional memory is lost, and veterans are not there to help newbies get better at their jobs. So we know the starting point for improving teaching should be an effort to replicate the practices that can be observed by watching good teachers work and giving teachers the time to watch and learn from one another. This is especially crucial when we know that only 50% of currently working teachers in the United States have had a high-quality student teaching experience. But our politics of education has never prioritized building a system that allows teachers to learn and lead together collaboratively. However, it is possible, and I know that Elizabeth is going to talk about that today. However, before she comes up, I would just like to read you a quote. It is something I heard from Christina Jean. She's a public school social studies teacher in Denver, and I met her while I was working on my book. Christina told me, "A lot of the discourse is about getting rid of bad teachers. Very rarely do I perceive teachers shown as anything other than cogs in a machine. But to improve teaching, the job must be challenging and stimulating to adults. I am an intelligent person who has this love and passion for educating kids. So let me use what I know to create an experience for my students that reflects my expertise." Thanks.
Hi. I'm equally very excited to be at Stanford with my friend Dana and my person that I've learned a lot from, Linda, as well as many other people that I spent reporting time with here. I want to start by, I'm going to do two things today. First, we're going to summarize my book, which I usually summarize, which is 300 pages, but don't let that deter you, but can be summarized in 40 minutes. I'm going to try to do that in 6 minutes. So this will be an exercise in pacing for any teachers. And just so you know, I'm not a teacher, so don't hold me to it too much. And then, should we have more time, should I succeed at doing this feat, which you will help me do, then I'm going to tell you some questions that keep me up at night, which I hope will spur our discussion going forward. So first, 40 minutes in 6 minutes. Okay, yeah, I get it. So I began this project myself when I was given an assignment by the New York Times Magazine. And they wanted someone to write about the topic of teacher quality. They figured that I would be a good person to do this because at that point I had spent my entire student and professional life every day getting up and trying to learn as much as I could about education, participating in the national education debate. So they figured I must know something about teaching, right? No, it turned out I didn't know anything. I actually had wrong ideas about teaching. So what inspired me to take on this book project was to help other people understand the process that I went through to see teaching differently. So to do that, I just want to walk through a quick simulation with you of my experience. Can anyone here tell me, remember we're on a time limit, what is 49 times 5? Just shout it out. Okay, you're right. Good job, applaud yourselves. You're gonna need it. Now, why would a child think that 49 times 5 is 405? Remember, we're under serious time pressure. I'm not gonna tell you, I'm gonna ask you a third question, and I will tell you at the end. Which of the following two people is most likely to know why a child would think that 49 times 5 is 405? Okay, for those who don't know who these people are, Hyman Bass is a decorated mathematician. He's won a ton of awards, one from a president. He invented a new field of algebra. I didn't know algebra had multiple fields. He invented one. It's called K-theory, just so you know. Deborah Ball is best known for her work teaching elementary school. So who votes for the mathematician? You can vote with applause. Oh, hi. Okay, who votes for Deborah? Yes, yes. And in fact, it was these two people together who walked me through a similar simulation. They helped me see that while the average adult needs to have a working knowledge of many subjects, a teacher doesn't just need to know the right answers to questions. She needs to know why students are going to get wrong answers. And she needs to know not just why, but then what to do about it. So in summary, teaching requires specialized knowledge and skill. It's not something that anyone is born knowing how to do. It's not a quality that we can look through a spreadsheet and say, you have it and you don't. It's something that is learned. So that's point number one. Point number two, we do not treat teaching that way in this country, as we've just been discussing. So super quick, two ways in which we don't do that. One is at the pre-service level. By and large in this country, we treat teaching the way this early education researcher who actually authored one of the first ever research articles about education in the first ever Journal of Education Research, we think about it mostly still the way he did. We say there is no such thing as a science of teaching. So what do we think about it? His colleague, another old dude with a weird name, said, teaching, it only requires common sense. Common sense. So the people whose job it was to create the institutions that would then prepare our country's teachers not only did not acknowledge that teaching requires specialized knowledge and skill, they had an opposing view. Then when these researchers had to actually deal with schools, they said that was really boring and they would really rather not do it. They were only actually put in education field because they couldn't get a job in psychology where they really wanted to be. And then this guy, he would fall asleep when he watched classrooms. Just fall asleep because he didn't see anything worth looking at. So that's pre-service. We don't treat teaching like it requires specialized knowledge and skill there. We also don't treat teaching this way when teachers enter the classroom. This is a guy named Stephen Farr. I learned that along with like half a dozen other people I'm about to talk about, he once gave this same lecture. He told me something about his teaching experience that many teachers told me in my reporting. He said that when he first was put in his position, he was assigned a mentor, as many teachers are, and she was told, as some mentors are told, to observe him teaching. But she said she was so embarrassed to observe him teach. She really would rather not do it because she said teaching is the second most private act. And you just don't want to get caught having someone watch you do it, and you certainly don't want to watch someone else do it. So another way to put this, that doesn't have to do with Victorian era sex, is what researchers call the egg crate school model. Teachers enter schools where they are isolated. So they often will not actually see one another teach for an entire career. And this is called the egg crate model because it's as if we think that teachers are like eggs. Were they to touch, they might break. So we protect them from each other, and as a result, we continue to treat teaching like it must be something that they're just born, being able to walk into a room and alone figure out how to do. Not like a craft that they might need to learn with peers, as everyone needs to learn complex tasks, cognitive and behavioral tasks. I just wanted to give a shout out to Dana that there is a historical root to this problem. It lies in the origins of American schools as a one-room schoolhouse. That's one of the theories put forward by Dan Larty, was all up in Stanford, right? A researcher, I think, had something to do with Stanford. Yes. No. Okay. Anyway, one of the arguments for why we have this is that it's a legacy of these one-room schoolhouses. We believed then that teachers should be isolated in cells. That was part of the just structure of our decision about how many people should be educated and how much we should invest in that. And we continue to this day to treat classrooms like their own little one-room schoolhouses. Okay, so teaching requires specialized knowledge and skill, but we don't treat it that way. And what's the result? The result is that we approach efforts to improve teaching in the wrong way. So what are the two most common approaches? One in the national debate is accountability. Let's sweep away the bad teachers. Let's identify how everyone's doing with data, and then let's fire the ones who aren't doing well. Dana just used like the coolest phrase to describe that, crack and whack or something like that. Yeah, wank and yank, that's good. Michelle re-symbolized it with a broom, sweep away the bad teachers. On the other hand, the argument put forward to counter those who argue for more teacher accountability is autonomy, most often. So folks say, we don't need to be measured more, we don't need to have more tests, we don't need to have more regulations, you need to just trust us. We are teachers, we know best, give us the time and space to figure out on our own what to do. So the problem with each of these two arguments, I concluded, is that they both subscribe to the myth that I started out with, that many of us hold, that teaching does not require specialized knowledge and skill. If you don't need to learn to teach, surely we can just say, you better do it, your results will show, and then ask them to do it, and they will. If you don't need to learn to teach also, we should just let people alone to figure out what they naturally know how to do on their own. Neither of these approaches make sense with the reality of what teaching is. So what is the better way to think about this? Really quick, did you put up the 2-minute thing? You did, okay. That means that 6 minutes is way behind us. So we're in serious business here. What could we do? What's another way? This is a professor of education who became very sad because she thought there's just nothing we can do. Schools are built wrong. Schools of education are built wrong. She cried. So she did what any professor who cries, I imagine, would do. She took a sabbatical. She went to Rome. See, Rome. And in Rome, her plan was to drink wine, learn Italian, and not think at all about education. So she enacted this plan with rigor. She looked on the internet for an Italian school, and she found one, and she signed up for it. And she took classes in the morning and drank wine at night. And it was called Italia Idea. And she was in this school when she has an epiphany. There's a moment that enacted her epiphany. The teacher was given a task, and the students were doing the task, and then 7 minutes way through the task, the teacher pauses, and he leaves the room, and then he comes back a minute later with a new task. So as I said, I'm not a teacher. I would have just not batted an eye, kept on the task, whatever. Magdalene Lampert is a master teacher, and she knew a fellow master teacher when she saw one. She knew what this teacher had done was study the students' work and diagnose the underlying misunderstanding, notice that that misunderstanding had nothing to do with the task he had given them, and then quickly give them a new task. Long story short, it turns out all the teachers at Italia Idea were like this. In the US, great teaching is often isolated, as teachers are isolated, not at scale. At this school, it was totally at scale. Every single teacher reliably had mastered the craft of teaching. So how? She thought it was about something she called infrastructure. What is infrastructure? In transportation, it's all the invisible stuff that makes it possible for people and stuff to move reliably across space and time. It's roads, bridges, speed limits, FAA regulations. In education, there's something similar going on at Italia Idea. At the core of the work was the same thing as anywhere. There were teachers, there were students, and then there was the material they needed to learn. Three core ingredients. But unlike in this country, where all of that is pretty much left up alone on the table, at Italia Idea, teachers, and materials, and students were surrounded by an invisible infrastructure, the systems that Linda and Dana mentioned, that allowed them to do this very well at scale. I could tell you a little bit about them, but I want to tell you what keeps me up at night. So, well, no, I should tell you a little bit about them. So one thing, material and technical resources. What allowed that teacher to leave the room and 1 minute later have a new task? Well, at this school, Italia Idea, teachers created a collective lesson bank. So one teacher's greatness did not need to, as John Dewey said, be born and die with that teacher. Instead, one teacher creates a good idea, other teachers have immediate access to it. What else? Induction, teacher education, and professional development. So it turns out that Italia Idea teachers are all trained in one institution. That institution does not believe that teaching is not a science. It actually only works on focusing on the science of teaching. And they all went there, they had good experiences, and they learned to teach. Finally, the organization of work. We talked about teachers' time. In this country, teachers spend an average of 1,000 hours a year in front of their students teaching. In countries that outperform us, it's almost half that. It's more like 600 hours. That leaves 400 plus hours in those countries for teachers to spend time, as Linda explained, it happens in Singapore and elsewhere, studying teaching, watching each other, studying the materials, and preparing. So I quickly want to preview what keeps me up at night. What keeps me up at night are 4 things. First, how do we get there? How do we build the infrastructure? There are competing theories that would be fun to talk about with you. Second, how do we create more time for learning? Within the politics of our country, it's easy to say we have 1,000 hours, let's change that, but it's much more difficult to redo scheduling to fix this. Third, what evidence is warrant enough for change? This is a huge part of our debate. So many folks will say to what all 3 of us are saying, I don't think you have evidence. In fact, I think that there's more evidence that teacher preparation doesn't work. So what evidence is warrant enough for change? Do we care about massive experimental type social science research, or do we also care about political, historical, and common sense knowledge of teachers in the field? I think this is a huge debate. And finally, where will we get the people to do this? We not only need to get teachers in the classroom who are dedicated to the belief that teaching is a science, we also need to create and build more institutions like the STEP program, where people who work there believe in teaching as a science and know how to help people learn to do it. So I didn't do it in 6 minutes, but we went through the whole thing together in 12. So thank you so much for having me and the 3 of us, and now we're going to begin our discussion.
wonderful tour around the world of teaching. We're going to have time for everyone to ask questions, so start thinking them up. And I'm going to tell you at the beginning that I'm going to give you an opportunity in a little bit to ask each other a question, so you can be thinking about that as well. But first I want to talk about the two different kind of wars that you actually both described. Dana, you described the wars over teachers' status and employment and all of the ways in which the job is structured and so on. And Liz, you described a different kind of war between the images of teaching that Maggie Lampert and Deborah Ball represent, that's very diagnostic and sophisticated and aimed at teaching for understanding, and sort of a more simplistic sort of get tough, feed the facts, spit them back kind of approach that I think you used Doug Lemov as an example of that. So both of those are tensions and conflicts that have been ongoing about what is good teaching and how do we structure the profession. Are we still at war? And if so, how might we resolve these conflicts?
I have noticed a cooling of the war over the past 2 years or so. I think there's a sense, driven in large part by frustration with standardized testing, that we've pushed the tough accountability, sweep out the bad guys efforts a bit too far. I think parents, middle-class parents who have the time to put into complaining about things have been driving a lot of this, especially recently, with their concerns about the amount of hours certain schools are spending not just giving kids tests. I've reported from districts that are spending, 30 full days per year on standardized testing, but also all the hours spent prepping for the tests, and it has a huge impact on kids. So as we're starting to see the impact on children of all these policies, there's been a shift in the debate. But one thing my study of history has taught me is that even though the war might cool down for a while, it's at risk of flaming back up. So what excites me about this moment is what sort of sustainable policy and political change is necessary. Can we learn from the excesses of the reform movement since No Child Left Behind about the last 15 years to make sustainable change, to focus on replicating best practices within the profession instead of the blame game? If we can do that in this moment, I think the next decade can be a lot more positive than the last one was.
Liz?
Well, and you asked me about the pedagogical war.
The pedagogical
also.
wars, yeah.
Yeah, I think, so I do think that tension will always live in the public's mind about teaching, and I think it's something that parents worry about. Like, should I send my kid to a progressive school where they're gonna have more independence, or should I instead send them to a school that's more rigid and disciplined, and which is better? But I found that the two groups that you described, the folks in the community that's been a long time studying teaching and teaching themselves, and are often based in universities and have strong academic disciplinary backgrounds, as well as pedagogical backgrounds, versus the entrepreneurial educators symbolized by Doug Lemov, who wrote the book Teach Like a Champion, and is a leader at Uncommon Schools Charter School and other No Excuses schools, where they're seen as more rigid and are in some ways more rigid. I think that debate among educators and even among those two camps is either always was thought or will thought, because, and I think this is symbolized in the Common Core standards, which both camps have embraced. The standards say what most teachers, I think, know, which is that there is no choice between let the students completely free or be completely disciplined. It's actually, the reality is you're gonna have to do some of both. Like, in every single moment, are you gonna tell a student the answer, or are you gonna let him struggle? And for how long? And that's the real question that I think matters more. And I think the standards show that really academically rigorous teaching will require the entrepreneurial educators to become more academically rigorous and subject matter experts, and to give students more independent time to think, and they're moving in that direction, or trying to.
And of course, the other part of it is that it's kind of framed as giving students more opportunity to do on their own and time to think versus structure, but that kind of pedagogy done well, like Maggie's example, is highly structured in its own way.
Exactly.
And the idea that there's going to be a top-down decision about what pedagogy to use, and then we're going to tell teachers what to do, ignores, as you said, what we know about good teachers, which is that they do both and. They know how to, teach decoding, and they know how to create literacy-rich environments, or they know how to ensure that kids learn their math facts while they're also learning to think mathematically, et cetera. And until teachers get the knowledge base themselves to make those decisions, we can't resolve that particular war.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I completely agree.
So I want to ask you, Liz, about one of your keeping you up at night thoughts, and we'll explore that a little bit. You asked the question, how do we get there? What do you think is the right theory of change? And do you have one, or do you have more than one? And how should we, understand those?
Yeah, so I think about it as, I think everyone here agrees with this concept that David Cohen, the scholar who's now at Harvard, who theorizes this infrastructure idea. We're all saying we need a system for every teacher to enter the profession and be responsibly supported in learning how to teach, but how do we create that system? So I think as I see it, there's two competing theories of change right now in this country. One says the reason that we haven't gotten this infrastructure is a lack of coherence, and the root of the lack of coherence is our governance structure of schooling. So we have the federal government, the state government, the local government, and then within even local school boards, one principal has one idea, another principal has another, and then that's not to speak of the textbook companies, which are unrelated, and the assessments, which are another thing, and all of these competing messages come to teachers about what they should be working on, and the result is chaos and an inability to build a coherent, strong system to help everyone learn what to do. Because if we haven't decided what we should be learning about and how we should be assessing that, then all bets are off for helping people learn how to teach students to learn that stuff. So the lack of coherence leads some people to say we need to blow up the existing governance structure. And this is why charter schools, one reason charter schools have had, in some small cases, better success, because they exist outside of traditional governance structures and can build their own small systems of coherence. The downside of charter schools is that they are not part of the governance structure that we care about in American democracy, that we built for a reason. And so that's the other argument, the other theory of change, which says, well, yeah, we might have a bad governance structure and it might be tough, but we did pass the Common Core standards in many states, even if they're white labeled in some states, they're pretty much the same. So we can have coherence within the construct of the traditional structure. So and I think that same debate of whether you blow things up and do it outside or whether you work within the system applies also to teacher education, applies also to many features of the infrastructure debate. So I see those as the two competing theories, and honestly, I don't know which one is going to be right. I could see downsides all around, but also upsides.
I think we all see the downsides all around. Dana, where would you put your bets?
I was really interested in a theory that was put forth by Jal Mehta, the Harvard sociologist, working in tandem with Stephen Tellez, who's a political scientist at Johns Hopkins. They have a phrase that they call communities of practice. Now, whatever any of us here might love or hate about the no excuses charter schools that Elizabeth just mentioned, the strict discipline KIPP type schools, I think they've been quite effective at creating a community of practice in that they're very able to articulate what they're doing pedagogically. They look for teachers who would like to work using those practices. They can very clearly describe what they're doing, and they share from school to school and from classroom to classroom within a school. And now they've even started some of their own teacher education programs and schools for the pre-service part. Now, there could be a Montessori version of that. There isn't right now, but there's no reason to think that that couldn't exist. And it could work within the traditional public system if we were able to let go of this idea that, say, mayoral control of schools means that individual principals can no longer be very creative within their schools and work with one another, say within a city or neighborhood, to cooperate. So I think when we think about American politics and education, we do have to realize that our system, our education system is, in the words of David Labaree, a scholar, education scholar, we are radically decentralized. I mean, we like our comparisons to Finland and to other high-performing nations, but they have very strong national governments. They have a national curriculum. The Common Core is not a national curriculum. It is a set of standards, and we've allowed states and districts a lot of flexibility in implementing them, and they will not all implement them well or faithfully. So we are starting at a disadvantage in a lot of ways when we're thinking of system-wide change because of federalism and the ethos of local control, which I think if we look at our overall politics, not just in education, but everything that's going on in our country, it is hard to imagine breaking out of that tradition, which goes back to our founding as a nation.
Are there any Canadians in the house? Is there? So Canada is an interesting counterexample because it is a high-performing nation. The individual provinces, Alberta, Ontario, and so on, are high-performing internet, and there's no national role in education whatsoever. But they do develop coherence at the state level through the way in which they train teachers and adopt curriculum and so on. So I wonder whether that's a better model for the United States than teeny tiny little Finland, which is the size of Wisconsin.
Well, I have a question for you, because I've often been so interested in the Canadian model, and how come we don't talk about Canada? Because they're our closest nation to us, and they're diverse. They have immigrants. They have a native population that deals with intergenerational poverty. So how come we don't talk about Canada? What's going on?
I think we should talk about Canada. I'm actually doing some studies in Canada right now. They would prefer that we not pay too much attention to them because they worry about ideas coming across the border northward from the United States. So they're trying to be under the radar scope because I think they have a much more, interestingly, and it's not, we have these huge political swings. When parties come into office, and we change ideologically, and we say, okay, we were doing this, but now we're going to stop doing that, and now we're going to do the opposite thing. Take Alberta, where it's been a conservative government for most of the last several decades, with some changes here and there, but they've maintained the same continuity, the same policies around considerable investment in teachers, teacher education. In fact, Teach for America in Alberta, Teach for Canada has come to Canada, and in Alberta, the teachers there will be allowed to teach in the Aboriginal communities, in the Inuit and other communities, after they've finished a full teacher education program. Then they can get additional preparation to go teach in those communities. So it's such a deep commitment to the preparation of teachers through one government after another. And to a partnership and working with teachers that they don't have these big pendulum swings. It might be the Canadian temperament, but I'm not a psychologist, so I can't really say. I want to ask about the way in which both of your books, and I am guilty of this as well in work I've done, place teachers at the center, right, of our dilemmas and our possibilities and our hopes and our dreams. And yet when you look at the explanations of variance and achievement, teachers constitute, generally speaking, less than 10%, depending on the study, between 2 and 14% of that variance. Socioeconomic status, particularly because of the way that we pile on in unequal school funding on top of poverty and segregation, accounts for about 60% of the variance. And then there are other school factors that are in there, and then a lot that we don't know. How much can we really expect of teachers? And are we setting them up to fail by paying so much attention to them as the change agents?
Yeah, this is a big part of my book, because when you go through history, you see the focus and demands on teachers raise as we become cynical about our other social systems. So for example, when Reconstruction ended in the South, It was a time of increased controversy over teaching. Similarly, in the late 1960s and early 1970s, as hopes for the Great Society curdled, and Brown v. Board turned out to not be implemented very strongly and to not solve our achievement gap, we again looked toward blaming veteran teachers, and it was another sort of moment of controversy. So our weak social safety net, our high levels of socioeconomic inequality are intimately twinned to the high, verging on unrealistic expectations we have for teachers. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that while also acknowledging that teachers can have an impact. And there is research that shows teachers do have an impact on student growth. So I think the expectations are unrealistic, but we have to have high expectations because the alternative is worse.
Yeah, I think it's actually irresponsible, some of the discourse that has come out of misinterpreted research that's translated into policy papers that deliberately misinterpret it, to say, which causes President Obama in the State of the Union address to say that teachers can close the achievement gap or solve poverty, effectively saying that, which is not actually what the research studies he's citing say. And so that's irresponsible because that raises an expectation on teachers that is not realistic. I think the reason that one of the many reasons I get kept up at night about learning time for teachers to learn, is that this, when teachers are forced to make a choice between the time they put with their own students and the time that they learn, that is a really devil's choice, especially for teachers in the most high-need communities, where in these communities you're more incentivized if you're a teacher who cares about your students to spend as much time as you can with them because there is no social safety net for them to have any other institution to go to. I really love this moment when Pasi Sahlberg, who led the Finland Renaissance in education, was asked in this small room that I was in, what was the single most important thing that changed everything in Finland? And he said, the election of more women into political office. Why? Because women put in political office will create stronger social safety nets, and that allows for education to thrive. So of course, these two things are related. Also, we need to honor the impact that teachers make, which is incredible. And it would be foolish not to invest in supporting teachers so that they can do their work, because they are the delivery agents of education.
And I guess the other question that we have as we come into the presidential elections is it also foolish not to actually address the issues of deep poverty and the lack of a social safety net? Because are we just, ignoring that by saying, oh, the teachers can do it all? What would you want to advise our next presidential candidates?
What would you want to advise our next presidential?
You go first.
I like that two journalists are being interviewed by an advisor to presidential candidates.
I'll take the bait on this. Going off of Elizabeth's comment about the way research is misused and how one of the things that keeps her up at night is what type of evidence do we need before we make a change. A lot of you here are probably familiar with the economist from Harvard, Raj Chetty. I just want to tell you briefly about two different studies that he's conducted. One found that an effective teacher who raises his or her students' test scores contributes to that student earning 1% more when that student is about 25 years old. And 1% more is a few $100s extra per year. That got a ton of media attention when that study came out a few years ago. It seemed to say that, hey, using these value-added measurement statistics, we can show that teachers that are good at raising test scores are also great at what we really care about, which is upward mobility. Now, keep that in mind with the very sort of, what we're talking about is quite modest. It's a few $100 extra per year. He just now has a new study that you may have read about in the New York Times, and it was about students who are poor, who before the age of 13 move with their families to a more integrated middle-class community. They made 30% more money in their mid-20s. So we're talking about a 1% versus a 30% effect size. Now, this is just one guy, one economist, Raj Chetty, 2 different studies. What I want to suggest to the next president would be to look at both of those and look at those different effect sizes and wonder if we can get where we want to go with what we've been doing, because we have not been looking at the intense socioeconomic and racial isolation of our neediest kids. And you don't just do that through education, you do that through the minimum wage and a bunch of other policies. But I would like them to think about that.
If we could get a president, if we could get a president who could understand effect sizes, I would. Do you think Jeb Bush understands? Don't know. If you think about that, just to build on that for a moment, and I'll give Liz another moment to think about her response. What's going on when you go into that suburban community is that you're going to a school that is much better funded. Yep. You're getting access to a much deeper and wider curriculum, probably reading specialists and additional resources of various kinds. So I want to add one other study to our list that I'd like our next president to have read. This is a study by Karabo Jackson, Rucker Johnson over at Cal Berkeley. I don't usually like to quote Cal Berkeley people, but there he is, and he's a good economist. And Karabo is at Northwestern. They did a study where they looked at across 40 years, 28 states that had done school finance reforms.
Yes.
And in the places where low-income kids had 20% more spent on them as a result of school finance reforms over their K-12 education, they graduated from high school at rates 20 percentage points higher, and they earned, their family income was 52% higher than it would have been, and they completely closed the adult poverty gap between poor and non-poor children by the time they were adults, just by virtue of those financial investments. So I think all of those are things that we should put on the reading list for the next president. Good luck to us, right? Liz?
Okay, so since you guys are saying those kinds of things, I'll say something totally different.
Good.
Which is, I think that there's a lot of reasons to be skeptical about the thrust of the last 25 years of educational interventions, and that is causing people on both the right and the left to sort of run away from a lot of the core elements of these interventions. But I think that it's also worth the next president remembering some of the progress that's been made and in these interventions, like moving towards more coherence and like, even though assessments are broken and damaged and making it not a happy place to live for teachers, still turning the national conversation so that we're sitting here talking about teaching, and there's huge investments being made in teacher education even at the national federal level. So I think that saying, let's throw out the whole thing that we've done would be just as foolish as ignoring other pieces of the puzzle that are going to be important.
I would love a day when there is a huge investment in teacher education at the federal level.
Or there's more. I think there's
been about 10 times more federal investment in Teach for America in the last few years than there has been in the whole of teacher education across the entire country.
On the other hand, the Gates Foundation, which was for 5 years ago saying teacher preparation doesn't matter at all, is now giving out $25 million in grants to teacher education as a cause. It doesn't mean that will
which is about as much as the federal government is putting in. So
I think that there is more attention and more resources are going that direction. And I also think we need to reconvene the resources we have.
I think that's all good. We need to move to audience questions, but I gave you an opportunity to see if you wanted to ask each other something. So, did you have a question you wanted to ask each other?
I came up with one.
Good.
So to the point that I just made about the arc of history. Your book is one of the many reasons your book is so much fun to read is these moments of, oh my gosh, like we're repeating ourselves. And I wonder, though, as you look across the trajectory, what are the positives, if any? Like, have we actually learned anything? And has there been any accumulated forward movement? And I already anticipated an easy answer for you, which would be that female teachers now make the same as male teachers, so I'm taking that off the table.
Okay, you're right. I had anticipated that answer and decided it would be too easy. Yeah, there's been a lot of positive things. There are some really easy ones, which is that we no longer allow de jure school segregation. We still have de facto school segregation, but in the South there were actually 2 separate school systems for Black and white children. And the South remains more integrated. The schools in the South are more integrated than the schools in the North racially, because the courts never required the Northern schools to racially desegregate. So that is a high moment in American education history. Another thing I'll just mention is that the idea of the teacher standing in front of the room and speaking throughout the whole class period, and there being very little student-driven instruction and very little time for students to construct their own learning is pretty much a thing of the past. I mean, in our big city districts these days, teachers have been given very clear instructions that that is not considered excellent instruction anymore in many places, and I think that is very encouraging on the pedagogical level, and it has moved the system, potentially toward a more progressive and student-centered type of learning.
All right. Do you have one for Liz?
Yeah, my question for you has to do with the time, and both you and Linda and I have all mentioned this, but what are some of the quicker, easier ways that you think that teachers can have more time in their work day and work week to do the type of lesson study, Japan-style collaborative learning? Mm-hmm. Because one of the things I hear about all the time when I talk about that is it's not in our contract, or even if I was here all day, the way my school is structured, it's just not possible.
Yeah. One example, I often will find a school leader who says, I've done that. I've done that at my school, and they're always asked the same question, what kind of grant did you get to make that possible? Well, they say, no, I didn't get a grant to make that possible. I changed the schedule. I just changed the schedule, creative scheduling. And well, how do you do that? Well, one way to do that is if there are different subjects that are taught, then certain subject matter teachers can have half day on that day. And the students will still have teachers, but the subject matter teachers will be pulled out and have their own time together. So that's just one example of creative scheduling that seems to be one key, but I actually spent a lot of time with Linda's work to try to answer this question, so I think you're a better respondent than I am.
I'll offer one fact, and I'll ask people who have questions to come to the mics, because we're going to get your questions in, so please come to the mics. One thing that's interesting if you look internationally is that in countries like Japan and some others, of the total education employee workforce, 70 to 80% are teachers. In the United States, about 50% are teachers. Only about 40% are actually doing full-time teaching. So we have a lot more levels of government. Here's where our levels of governments, a lot of employees at different levels, a lot more administrative employees, not necessarily principals or administrators, but administrative staff, paraprofessionals and other things. So usually when people have to restructure to get a lot of time, they need to rethink the staffing as well as the time, although there are a variety of ways to do it. So let's get some other voices in. Introduce yourself first, please.
Sure. I'm Katie Hammond. I'm a graduate of the PULSE program here at Stanford. And one of the conversations we had last year was about getting teacher buy-in with the changes that have come and gone and come back again. And there are different backgrounds. Some people have come from traditional teaching programs, some not. How are you going to get them to go in and not just say, the administration has said, this particular teacher-focused instruction versus student-centered instruction is the way to go, and actually get them to sit down and do that in their classrooms?
I didn't catch the first part of your question, did you guys?
That. No.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So I'm asking how you're going to get teachers to buy into whatever theory of change, whatever reform you do, because they've come from so many different backgrounds and so many different training programs and seen so much come and go and come back again.
Yeah.
That is this time just one more thing that I have to
Right.
fake my way through for a little longer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So one of the people that I talked to for my book was a educator, worked with the AFT, and she called this the "this too shall pass" phenomenon. And just why listen? And it's no wonder teachers advocate for more autonomy. Like, get the out of my business. So I think, though, that when teachers encounter experiences that actually connect with their real practice, they are transformed. So one example I saw was Pam Grossman's Plato Professional Development Project in San Francisco. I met a veteran, 25 plus, 30 plus year teacher who entered this program not out of her own volition, and told me, in fact, that when she showed up, she said her whole experience with professional development led her to believe that she would get nothing out of this, but she had to show up, so she did, and this is a widely shared experience. But then something happened in the professional development experience, which was Pam Grossman happened, and she actually knows something about English teaching and gave real examples that connected with Lorraine's actual work. And that led Lorraine to say, I want to take this back. She transformed her classroom. And she, I think, is a really good example of the many, many people who are not getting fabulous results. She will say herself, you know, a small number of students in my classroom were excellent writers. I didn't know it was possible for all of them to do excellent writing until I had this encounter with a deeper way to do my practice.
And Deborah Ball years ago talked about learning to teach in practice, learning to practice in practice. And I think good teacher education programs take that seriously because they tie the clinical practice to whatever they're teaching, and good professional development programs
Yes.
like the one you described do that as well. They're not going wah, 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 do
Right.
this, do this. They're actually tying it directly to what the practices are. And so that's our hope. Let's go on this side for one.
Hi, I'm Jenna Wachtel. I'm a very grateful graduate of the STEP program, and I would love to hear from your opinion, based on your research and experiences, what do you see as the next step we should be taking to professionalize early childhood education and ensure access to high quality early childhood education?
Nina?
Sorry, access to high quality what?
Early childhood
early
teacher
childhood
education.
teacher education. I'm not the teacher ed person up here, so I'm gonna punt on that one.
I think one of the things that we're seeing in states that are taking up this question is that when they, for example, in New Jersey, created early childhood programs and made their investments and paid teachers the same wages as the K-12 teachers, and did very strong investment in giving the existing educator workforce opportunities to learn. They went in 5 years from 90% of those teachers not having a bachelor's in early childhood expertise. 5 years later, 90% had that expertise, both because of making the learning opportunities readily available to them in their schools and in a variety of other ways, and making the wages comparable to those of other teachers so that people could see the value in getting prepared to go into and stay in that field.
Yeah, I see early childhood, I mean,
It's
it's underinvested in, but it's actually has tremendous opportunity because of how new a public investment in early childhood education is. So we can create a whole new system where there wasn't one, and that can be done shabbily, or that could be done really well, and it could be transformative.
Let's go back over here.
Hi, my name is Mary Ducharme, and I want to say thank you to Liz I appreciate your comment regarding giving teachers some time to collaborate into lesson study. And I also would like to ask Dana in regards to Common Core. If it's a new program, or it's a revolutionary process that we're going through, and it's working in my classroom. I'm a second grade teacher. I'd like to know, if not Common Core, then what?
I like the Common Core a lot. I think the standards themselves represent what could be a huge step forward for millions of children. What I think is really unfortunate is the fact that they were implemented side by side, simultaneously, to efforts to use the tests tied to them in potentially punitive way for educators. And what this led to was an unraveling of what had been the bipartisan consensus to make this time work, because we've tried to have national curriculum standards in the past and it hasn't worked in the past. So my big fear right now is that we will give up on what's good in the Common Core because we are sort of rightfully anxious about the standardized tests and accountability elements tied to it. I think that would be a huge, huge loss, and it's something to watch politically over the next couple of years. So I don't think there should be something other than the Common Core. I think it should be the Common Core.
I will just say that the Common Core implementation in California is utterly different than the Common Core implementation in places like New York, where a lot of the, in fact, almost 200,000 parents have opted out of the tests and their kids. And here we've dissociated the Common Core standards. First of all, there's been a big investment in professional development, a couple of $1 billion from the state, and we've completely dissociated them from any kind of punitive testing. So I think the way in which Common Core gets implemented can vary. And
Absolutely.
most teachers, I think, feel the way that we just heard in California.
Hi, I'm Philip Taylor. I'm a real estate developer. I'm interested in building schools and staffing schools and, frankly, controlling schools as a benevolent dictator.
It's good to be honest.
But my question is, Liz, I was mesmerized by your book.
Thank you.
It is the most transforming thing I've ever read in education. My question is, what is the reason or the excuse or whatever that Stanford, Linda, is not the example that you gave of the Italian school that so well trained this cadre of teachers? I mean, I can understand the difficulty.
Because Maggie took her sabbatical in Italy, and
No, I
but
got
had
it.
we come to Stanford, you could have told a similar story.
No, I'm with you, and I'm really not saying it confrontationally. I mean in the sense that I understand the public school system to say, why don't we just go do that down the street's kind of tough. But at Stanford, why not? And in fact, why not even carry it further as you were outlined? Because, I mean, you're the power in the country, Linda. And you are.
Where are my kids? I would like them to know that.
But I'm thinking, and not just for your 4-year program, why don't make it 6 years, like the Finnish program, where they have to have a lot of this in-school mentored training before they're out in the world. And for someone to get someone from Stanford, they know they have all of that. And it becomes the petri dish here for you doing it the way you all know how to do it.
So I think this is a question for me, which I'll take a minute on. First of all, I will say that if you talk to Pasi Sahlberg, I was just with him a couple of weekends ago, and he wrote the book Finnish Lessons about all of the ways in which Finland became a high-performing country when they didn't really intend to. They just wanted to get ahead of the Swedes. That was their main goal, which they have done. But the Finnish model of teacher education, which is the 2-year master's degree, is not unlike, in many respects, the master's degree that Stanford gives in its Stanford Teacher Education Program. And he pointed out to some legislators that they actually studied our program and adopted many of those features in theirs. However, there are differences in the context. And one of the big differences is that in Finland, if you will go into a teacher education program, it's completely free to you. And you get a stipend while you're studying. And that allows people to take the 2 years that it takes in that program. We thought at Stanford about extending the length of our program. But if you look at the Stanford tuition, anybody looked at that lately? And the fact that there's absolutely no investment in California any longer for teacher education, and most of the federal money has also been eliminated. People have to go into significant debt to become a teacher in the United States, where they'll earn 60% of what other college-educated graduates learn. So we have to solve both problems. We have to build great programs, and I think based on the emails that we get from our graduates at STEP, who every year write, Rachel's got, I don't know, thousands of them. I have maybe hundreds, and they say, I was so well prepared to teach, and I've gone on and I've done this, and I was just talking to some of our graduates who are, kind of changing the world out there. But they do that at great sacrifice, at great personal sacrifice.
Because
we need both hands clapping. We need the investments and the high quality.
I agree 100%, and I'm glad you got to that, because I can't imagine that stopping you from doing it at Stanford. I mean, between Toby and Arriaga and the Cred Foundation and a variety of other people you tied on this, and no one has told them that story yet about this part of what you could build here. Yeah. I mean, this is really powerful.
Well, and we do get good, our dean and our president and our provost have helped us raise scholarship money for our students. But what we can do in a wealthy place like this to help offset that, and what you can do nationally, are two different things. And we need a national agenda. We need to be able to say, as President Obama promised, and I'm waiting on this one, if you will teach, we will pay for your education, nationally. Is our time? I think it's our time. Our dean is at the podium.
No, actually, I just want to end on that note, because it couldn't be a better opportunity for me to share with you that the Graduate School of Education has articulated a goal, and we have made this public, and we are eager to have help in spreading the word that we want to be the first university to make the preparation of teachers completely free. That'll require a little help from our donors and friends, so share that.